Earth is suffering a
There
crisis
are
of mass
concerns that
extinction.
governments will reject more drastic measures to cut carbon
need to
emissions.
peak within the next 3 years if we are to stave off the worst effects of climate change.
Wild plants and animals are running out of places to
UN
live.
scientists are warning we are on course for devastating changes to our climate, and the results will be
In
catastrophic.
what year will the human population grow too large for the Earth to sustain?
Climate change and global warming are accelerated by numerous factors. Fossil fuels, deforestation, overfishing, farming, power plants, waste management, oil drilling, transportation, industrialization, consumerism, etc. The list goes on and on. As natural resources are depleted and the planet reaches a point of no return, we have to make accommodations. We have to adapt. We not only have to change the way we live, but we have to change the way we fight. Green war is a theorized type of warfare, very possibly the next type of warfare, with countries, governments, and private entities fighting for limited natural resources as climate change rapidly changes our Earth. Listen in as national security experts give their point of view on a potentially looming future. This is Green War. Episode 2, Flaws in the System. I'm here again with Eric Lyon, and we're going to jump right in with a question about failures in the general framework. What would you say is the impact of our present outdated energy infrastructure in regards to our domestic and national security?
Our present energy infrastructure is across the board outdated. It's outdated technology, it's an outdated template, and it really shows outdated thinking. And that's probably the same, across the globe. I had the opportunity to do a kind of infrastructure analysis course a couple of years ago with the military. And we studied different parts of like the power generation architecture. And it was very educational, because obviously that's not my background. But like we went to a, decommissioned coal plant. This stuff was like built in the 50s. Also going to like a power switching station. Some of like the ceramic molding that they had for insulators. The guy giving us the tour, he's like, hey, see that insulator? That was built in 1919 after World War I. And I'm like, really? That's a century old. He's like, yeah. He's like, generally speaking, in the power infrastructure industry, they're like, we replace nothing until it breaks. Like literally nothing. It's a short-term, immediate money thing. If we don't need to spend the money on it, we're not going to spend it on it until basically there's a catastrophic failure. I also went to a natural gas energy production plant. And the engines that were running, powered by the natural gas and then, creates your electricity, were German engines built in the 50s. And I'm like, really? That like those engines there are 70 years old? He's like, yep. And he says, you know what? They're running fine. They're so well engineered. But that gave me some insight into just, the thought process of our infrastructure, how dated it is, how old it is, and how we're using concepts that are centuries old. And it's my opinion, ultimately, we have energy insecurity with these outdated systems that are all carbon-based, which contribute to our global warming, and all the negative impacts of that. Our outdated energy infrastructure is a source of our insecurity. And I think moving forward, we need to have a new vision. We need to have new models. We need to embrace new thought processes like virtual power plants, of integrated energy sources, local energy sources, obviously solar, wind, hydrogen, geothermal, and it all needs to be managed in a modern way that's interconnected, where you take energy from electric car batteries, you take electricity from, Powerwall batteries in your garage, and it all is connected to the local system and feeds in and goes back and forth as needed. Right now, our system's not set up like that. Our system is very much antiquated, over-centralized, and carbon-based, and using technology literally from a century ago. And I would say in line with that century-old technology is our century-old thinking. Our thinking of how we generate power and how we provide energy security is from a century ago. It is old school, it is outdated, and it has not kept up with modern technology and modern thinking.
Now, in the winter of 2020, the Texas power grid had a catastrophic failure that really exposed the vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. How does something like that impact our domestic and climate security?
The failure of the Texas energy power generation system in the winter of 2020 is an example of our inherent energy insecurity in the United States. Now, we're talking about Texas, but you could talk about California. You could talk about other parts of the United States. You could talk other parts of the world. Texas uses an over-centralized, antiquated, single point of failure, carbon-based energy power generation system, as does almost all the United States, as does most of the world. But that shows you a very good example of how our antiquated, fossil fuel, over-centralized based grid is a source of our insecurity. It is a source, it's domestic insecurity, it's international insecurity, it contributes to our climate insecurity. If we want to use Texas as an example, so that should be the model that we don't follow. We should be looking at a decentralized process. We should be looking at, solar generation on every home, solar generation on every commercial building, solar generation, at every parking lot. Every place where you can put solar panels, and it's not hard, the structures already exist, we should be putting solar. And these should be in localized grids where, every home is its own utility, every neighborhood is its own utility, every town is its own utility, where they're all kind of interconnected, where your electric batteries from your car, your battery backup in your garage, or the battery backup at your office, or other energy storage solutions in your community are all kind of interconnected, yet they can operate by themselves. So if my power lines, are cut off or they're frozen or a tree knocks them down, it doesn't mean there is now no electricity or no energy provided to an entire neighborhood of like 10,000 people. And if it's in cold weather, now you got freezing problems. And now people could unfortunately, die from the cold. That shouldn't be existing, in a modern society. All those homes should have backup batteries. They should have, 8 24-hour backup of energy, at their house, at their location. If you're dealing with solar, or if maybe you have some land or a farm and you got wind generation, all that stuff should be a source of your own energy and your own electricity. That kind of decentralized, managed by what they call a virtual power plant, where every structure is its own utility, that's a source of energy security. That's a source of energy resilience. That is a backup to when there's catastrophic failure, you have some means to generate your own electricity, or you've got it stored in an emergency until you can get things repaired. But in my opinion, that's how power generation needs to be thought of conceptually in the United States moving forward. It needs to be decentralized. Every structure we have should be its own utility, and that in itself will be our source of collective national energy security as opposed to antiquated, over-centralized energy insecurity.
What role does something like climate disinformation and denial play?
I wrote my thesis about a topic called green war, which is the kind of the battle on many playing fields of trying to stop man-made global warming and the conflict of those that contribute to man-made global warming and those that see it as a problem and want to stop it. An important aspect of that was disinformation and denial. There is a large element of climate change disinformation and denial in our societies. And I can speak from the United States. I'm an American, although the disinformation and denial campaign is global. It's a global phenomenon where you have like front companies that straight out spread disinformation about climate change, that it's not real, that it's a hoax, that it's made up. And you will hear a bizarre concoction of conspiracy theories of how, climate change is a way to control you. And I've heard, bizarre theories of like the United Nations and these global institutions really want to control you and want to tell you what to do by making you use renewable energy. On the face of that, I find that, absurd, preposterous, ridiculous, like no learned education or educated person who has any knowledge of this topic could ever think that or believe that. However, that's not how disinformation works. Disinformation works by preying on people not knowledgeable in the field, preying on people who may be gullible, preying on people who have a certain, confirmation bias, and you're just telling them what they want to hear. So there are concerted efforts, there are front companies, there are organizations backed straight up by the oil and gas industry that want to promote a carbon-based economy and want to continue to promote the widespread use of carbon-based fuels in our society. And they will spread disinformation, and they will get other people to kind of parrot their disinformation and limit kind of the negative impact of climate change. We also see state actors get involved in disinformation and denial campaigns. The Russians are infamous for using contentious social topics like the pandemic, like climate change, to have, bot networks spread disinformation through Facebook, through Twitter, through all these other different social media platforms to create disunity in the U.S. and other countries like Australia as well, where this can be a contentious political and social topic. Other kind of malign actors see this readily and prey on the divisions and intentionally spread disinformation, push denial of these very real climate processes that have just overwhelming scientific evidence, overwhelming research supporting it, overwhelming, consensus from the scientific community, but they try to create divisions. They try to get you to question that science in order to spread division to their very short-term political gain.
Adam, how important is the damage from cyber attacks to infrastructure related to water, energy, gas, and oil security? And how do these attacks impact our national security?
A lot of our infrastructure, and when I talk about infrastructure, particularly as it pertains to climate, we're talking about water treatment plants, desalination, energy sector, and even some others that have impacts, for example, manufacturing. All of these industries have networked systems and computers that communicate with one another. Anything that's networked can be vulnerable and it can be exploited. An example, if we go back far enough in time, around 2010, there was the Stuxnet virus that attacked some industrial control systems in Iran at a nuclear facility. And what the malware did, this virus Stuxnet, is it targeted specific systems so that they would operate in the real world and mechanical world out of tolerance, and it damaged them physically. So this is an example of a virus, presumably from a nation state, that infected a country in their nuclear program. In this case, it happened to be going after a weapons manufacturer or potential weapons manufacturer. But if you look at that from a perspective of climate change, knowing that that capability exists and knowing that vulnerability exists, and that there are nation states that are actively targeting other nation states, does that deter certain countries from transitioning away from fossil fuels, for example, to nuclear? Or does it make them reevaluate how they're going to approach these things? Those industrial control systems extend beyond something like a nuclear facility. They're used in pipelines to control the flow of oil, for example. This year we've seen the attack on the Colonial Pipeline. What's interesting about that is how many people lost energy and how large that impact was. How scary it looks if you look at it from a threat to the nation state. But the underlying problem was that it wasn't the industrial control system that was attacked, it was the billing system. So the power was actually shut off to make sure that they were regulating and getting the finance out of it rather than providing energy to the people that needed it.
So in talking about the types of hackers, years ago, people would think of foreign adversaries and nations overseas as being the ones who could do the serious hacking. Nowadays, a kid who learned something off of YouTube in his parents' basement seems to be able to get access to infrastructure and make it vulnerable to attack. How easy is it?
Cybersecurity, I think like most security professions, faces a double-edged sword in that it is a constant cat and mouse game between offense and defense. If we look at football in the NFL and we look at the level of play and the complexity of strategies used in the first Super Bowl, for example, as opposed to modern play, It's evolved and it's continuing to evolve, and that's because the defense informs the offense changes what they do, the defense counteracts, and that continues. The same thing applies in cybersecurity. So tools become more widely available, which means anybody can access them. Tutorials are broadly available all over the internet. YouTube is a fabulous resource, and I'm not trying to encourage anybody to go out there and learn hacking, but if you want to get into the profession and do it for ethical and moral reasons, that's a great place to start. And so it can be simple. It can be somebody who finds things and is exploring them, as we mentioned, or it could be something as complex as nation-state hackers that have access to unlimited resources in this context. I think the big distinguisher between them is the amount of time that's available. So, for example, the more amateurish hackers or those with nefarious intention are more likely to go after targets of opportunity, things that are available. The Florida water treatment plant, for example. Based on what I know of it, which is limited, I would guess that was probably a target of opportunity where somebody found a vulnerable system, found a way to compromise it, explored it a little bit, and then moved on. That, to me, is more of somebody who's just trying to find things and explore it. A nation state or a hacktivist collective or criminals or those who are relying on ransomware, they have a little bit more time on their hands. They'll find specific targets. They'll make sure they're getting the most lucrative target sets. It doesn't do any good to ransomware data that nobody cares about, so they're going to go after things that people do care about. Healthcare is an industry that is plagued by ransomware because healthcare data records and individuals' electronic protected health information is one of the most expensive data sets out there. So it's a known source where they can gather money. Those are individuals that take time, do preparation, spend effort. The nation state has even more time, and they have more people. So you might have a team of people, those who have specialized expertise in networking, for example, on malware analysis or tool development. Some of these tools then end up on the internet. U.S. government developed hacker tools and analysis tools that ended up leaving that closed system, and we see them now in modern ransomware attacks. So you see nation state is influencing and making it easier for the amateur at the same time.
The Internet of Things, IoT items, things in our homes that are part of everyday life, nests, thermostats, refrigerators, things like that. Can hackers actually target the systems more easily via people's homes and not necessarily at the corporation or company level?
All right, so the Internet of Things makes life a lot easier and it makes it more comfortable. But each device connected to the Internet or even to a home network or local network provides a point of entry into the network. So you may think, hack my refrigerator. I don't care. But your refrigerator is connected to your home network. Your TV is connected to your Netflix account. Your TV is on the same network that your children are watching YouTube videos on and going and playing online video games, and where your social media is. And then your home office is connected. Your personal finance is there. Most people don't care about any of those things, from the hacker perspective, but they care about the physical resources that each one of those devices provides. I'll give you an example. I lived in Maryland when I retired from the Army, and Maryland was making a major push for renewable energy. And so the state was subsidizing installation of solar panels. They go through and they find residential areas and say, hey, we will come in, we will install solar panels, we'll put everything that's in there. It'll create energy, it sells it to BG&E, the power company, and then you get a reduced rate, and any excess, can go back to powering your home, et cetera. How does all that work? If you install solar panels on my house, how does BG&E know how much my house is producing, how much I'm consuming, whether or not there's excess, how does it get diverted, all those things. Being a cyber nerd, I ran a scan of my own home network one time, and I saw an IP address I was not familiar with. So I just opened a web browser and typed in the IP address, and I was presented with a login page. Username and password, that's all it says. I could tell from the presentation that it was related to the solar panels. I typed in admin. First guess. I have full access. Once I have full access, I can control and set how much each of these panels is communicating to the servers on the other end. I could, if I wanted to, say that I'm producing more energy. There's a number of things that you could do at that local level. Let's extrapolate that. How many homes did those same installers put these systems on exactly the same way? So each one of these solar panel systems is an IoT with an IP address, and every single one of them is protected by default username password combination that's very easy to figure out. So you could actually impact a residential area, a city. IoT presents a lot of complexity and vulnerability that I think we need to spend more effort securing.
So, Eric, we talk about the idea of civil breakdown and potential civil war based on climate change and lack of energy resources. How does that impact our national security, both domestically and internationally?
There has been some ideas put out, some research done on what's the potential for civil unrest, civil disturbance, civil breakdown, based on our current energy infrastructure. and also kind of the transition to different energy sources. Could our failed energy infrastructure, could that lead to some kind of civil war or civil breakdown? Some people have, kind of addressed the topic. So we do see some conflict in it. If you want to talk about like the Earth Liberation Front, which I don't think is active any longer. They were more active, I think, in the early 2000s. But the Earth Liberation Front was a kind of U.S. West Coast-based resistance movement that did not like where our society was going from how we treated our environment, how we interacted with our environment. A complete lack of respect of humanity for our environment, and kind of a relationship to it. So they were labeled an eco-terrorist movement. I think with some of their attacks, they destroyed logging equipment, tractors, bulldozers, anything heavy equipment used for logging our forests. At night they'd go out there and they would disable them, or they'd set them on fire, or they'd destroy them somehow. I think there were thousands of attacks. Another attack was like on an SUV dealership, where they burned down, the entire inventory in the parking lot. There was another case, I think it was in California, where they're like kind of building these luxury homes in the wilderness. So kind of people with money can go out there for once a month, in the summertime. They burn down these houses. So we've already seen some conflict with eco-terrorism, kind of based on our interaction with the environment and how we treat it. There's another group that was formed only a couple of years ago out of England called Extinction Rebellion. This is another kind of climate-based organization that is very concerned with our climate and how humanity interacts with it and the damage that we're causing to it. And there are, a certain measure of civil unrest in England, with Extinction Rebellion kind of on the forefront here, raising awareness of the problems with our climate, with everything we talked about, how humanity is not living in a balanced manner with our Earth. So there is already a certain level of civil unrest and conflict, which I kind of term our green war, this conflict between people who want a more sustainable society, sustainable living, and on the other side where people see it as just like predatory capitalism, predatory fossil fuel practices. Could this lead to a civil unrest, civil war on a national level based specifically on climate concerns and our energy? That's hard to say. I don't see anything on the horizon right now. But let's go back to the Syrian civil war example, where that drought, that fundamental change to their millions of people's livelihoods, their agriculture, their livestock, kind of secondary effects that result in the destruction of their communities, of the family structure, leading to mass climate migration. Yeah, that can lead to very real national civil unrest. Did in Syria. It was a significant contributor to it. And when you got millions of people displaced, living in an urban environment, not where they're from, not what they're used to, living with their cousin, where they're no longer even capable of providing for their family, for their wives, for their children, that creates discontent with the political status quo, and they want to change. And then if a group wants to come in, like an Al-Qaeda, like an ISIS, or, put a whole bunch of other groups in there. We see this in Africa as well, where, lakes have dried up, where communities can no longer fish, communities can no longer provide for themselves. When you're in that situation, you feel powerless, right? You probably feel humiliated. You feel like you can't provide for your family anymore because your environment's changed. And we've contributed to that. Groups will come in and they'll say, you want your power back? You want to be somebody again? You want to provide for your family? You know what they say? Here's an AK-47. Here's an AK-47 and here's $500 a month. You want to do something about it? You want to change your political situation? You want to change your financial situation? Here, join my group. We're about political change. We're about making a difference. Maybe they are. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's altruistic. Most likely it isn't. But groups with resources will come in. We see it in the Middle East. We see it in Latin America. We see it in Africa. You are disempowered. you're humiliated. The family function or the family unit may no longer function reliably any longer. Your community may not even function reliably any longer because maybe you've had to move. And know how I empower you? $500 and an AK-47. And now you got power back. And now you do have say. And now you can change things. It's through violence. It's through intimidation. It's through strong-arming people, right? It's through extortion. But now you've got your lost power back, and now you can do something. And that's how groups, individuals can manipulate families, communities, societies, maybe for a different cause. So you'd have to go down a pretty far path to get climate change and energy-based problems to a state of civil conflict and civil war. But I think we can provide concrete examples where it has contributed to that significantly in different areas of the world. And I can only think those dynamics will increase in the future as our extreme weather conditions continue. It's not that far-fetched. We've already seen it, kind of regionally and locally. I suspect it'll expand.
The Over the Horizon series is produced by Mohammed Mirgahari. Special thanks to Alex Hall, Adam Nielsen, Eric Lyon, and Ruth Wilhoit. Sound recording and mix by Mike Zhu. This is a Sputnik Media production.